Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the podcast, Master Random, the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the official sponsor of episode 200, the live show, which was a couple months ago and 2 episodes ago. It's still one to remember. I still really want to try and do another live show down the line, and I hope I can invite everybody, and we will invite everybody, and it'll be awesome. But to the sponsor, this episode is brought to you by Budweiser. It is an American style lager that has been distributed by Ambrose since 1949. Did you know the first shipment of Budweiser was 500 cases to the island that sold out in 2 days? After another 1,500 cases were delivered to Guam, Ambrose became the sole distributor of Budweiser to the island. A couple of fast facts for you. Ambrose has a really long history on this island and will continue to build its legacy of distributing all kinds of products, including Budweiser, and continue to be the top selling beer on Guam. Today is the top selling beer on this island today, and will continue to be the top selling beer on this island in the future. So go drink some Budweiser, enjoy responsibly, and drink wiser. This episode is also brought to you by Payless One. They are your one-stop for organic and natural products and education. ONE, organic, natural education. They are located next to the GEDA Payless. Payless One is your dedicated destination for organic food, home, health, and beauty products. Instead of traversing around a regular Payless trying to find the organic products and trying to determine whether you want an organic product next in lieu of your favorite chips, guess what? Payless One makes it super easy for you by condensing the entire grocery store into one organic store. Everything's in there. Every corner you turn will be an organic product, so that your choice is always organic. So go to a Payless One to shop, learn, and stay healthy. They are open daily from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. next to the GEDA Payless. Those were the sponsors. My next guest, I was almost going to say this episode is also brought to you by, but my next guest with an S on the show is EJ McManus and Mel Mendiola. EJ hit me up about a week before he came out. He's been a long-time listener of the podcast, and I've never met EJ before. Come to find out, things tie together closer. We're both FD grads, and his interest in the show and wanting to come onto the show piqued my interest, and we had an incredible conversation about progression and moving Guam forward, how to move forward. And we had an added element of Mel Mendiola. She's the administrator of GEDA, the Guam Economic Development Association. And what a treat to have them both on the podcast and being able to talk on a progressive level for Guam. So I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. I surely did, and I hope to get Mel back. I feel like we only picked her brain for just the surface. Well, me and EJ, we had a conversation for about an hour before we started, and 30 minutes. You hear the first about 20 to 30 minutes is with EJ by himself, and then Mel comes in, and we sort of get the train rolling and strolling. But let me not bore you with all that. Let's get to the conversation with EJ McManus and Mel Mendiola on the podcast, Master Random. Check it out. We had a killer conversation before this podcast started, and now we can make it official. Welcome to the show, EJ.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, dude.
Killer pizza too that we had already.
yeah. We had some Tommy's Pizza.
Yeah.
We always support Tomas. We actually have the same birthday, so when I went over there, he's like, "Hey, happy birthday!" It's like, "Oh shit, yeah, happy birthday to you too." And it took us a couple times to like see each other out at the bar or something like that to say we're a happy birthday. That we realize that we have the same birthday and stuff like that. So,
but your birthday's today?
No. On the 9th, so it passed. I just turned 32.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So,
happy belated birthday. Dude.
Thank you, man. I feel my body feels old, but the mind still feels young. So.
Hey, well, it doesn't look old.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully, it stays that way.
Just gotta work at it.
Yeah. I'm glad to have been blessed with decent genes, not too much aging genes, and we'll see how it goes from here.
Yeah. I think people from the islands have that special gene where I don't know if it's just because we're sweating all the time or maybe we just eat a lot of coconuts. No, just kidding.
I think it's the Spanish Filipino blood.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of Spanish people who look young, and a lot of especially Filipinos, they look young. I have Filipino in me. My mom's I want to say a little less than half or over a quarter. I don't know. We didn't get the specific cuts of what the genes are. But I'm glad to be alive and still be doing this podcast. And it's cool how before you came here, you hit me up and come to find out you've been listening to the podcast for a long time. And there's no way I could turn down a conversation with you. We did a podcast last night with Joe Pereira, and come to find out when I was at Joe's studio that you guys are classmates. How about that, Matt? They're classmates. Him and Joe. Yeah.
It's a trick. I knew it. So,
it was a fluffer. It was a.
Right.
Oh, sorry, Joe. I didn't mean to call you. I don't mean to call you a buffer.
I think you just called him a fluffer.
Yeah, man. I'm so sorry, Joe. Fuck. I didn't mean to call you that. Do you know what a fluffer is, Matt?
I don't. What is it?
Well, I don't want to know either.
Yeah, you don't. Do you know what a fluffer is?
No.
So a fluffer, and I think I said fluffer because it's like someone was talking to me about it last week, and they were asking me if I knew, and I kind of knew, and then they felt the need to like really explain it to me, and it's the person who gives the blowjob to the guy on set in between scenes. gives the dude fellatio so he can stay hard in between scenes. So I'm sorry, Joe. I didn't mean to call you fluffer. Buffer.
I think we need to change the subject.
Joe understand. Right. I love Joe so much. And you invited Mel here, and we're waiting for her. If she's coming up, just let her let her know. Text her. She can come on inside, but we can jump and get the conversation started. Just in the little snippet of the text that you sent me, I was interested right away. You have years of experience in policy making, and you're involved with a lot of different stuff over in Oregon, Portland specifically, and you've been out there for how many years?
Pretty much close to 17.
17 years?
Yeah. Once I graduated from, shout out FD.
Yeah. Even Matt, he's a 2015.
Wow. Thanks for making me feel old, dude.
I'm 2005.
I know. I was the last 19 Tanaki. But yeah, so 99 left. Went with a couple good buddies of ours, and pretty much been in the Northwest. Being involved in the community, similar to what I feel from growing up in the islands, of just really wanting to be a part of not just the generation that is moving forward, but obviously if you're having a family, you want to make sure that they're having what you want them to have. So always been trying to kind of make sure that my interaction, both on a civil level as well as professionally, I have that opportunity.
Huh. Yeah.
And I've been doing that, not everything's a success, but, I was an elected official for 12 years.
Really?
Ran, I was a city council member, did 3, elections.
What got you into that specifically? Did you major in anything?
I did, kind of those who are interested usually in politics, you take poli-sci.
Poli-sci, right?
But it actually got my interest more after my folks, when they moved to Oregon, they bought a Eastern European restaurant and they wanted to mix Polynesian into it. So they wanted to take Chamorro food and anything that my mom wanted that she learned from the islands of Palau. And
Micronesian, you mean?
Micronesian.
Right,
yeah,
right.
But we, unfortunately, and see, this is the education, we had to say Polynesian.
Really?
Yeah, so that then we can then educate and say, well, we're actually from the Micronesian Islands, because no one knew what Micronesian was. They would think, oh, can you further explain that? And so we
Is
were
that,
like,
by Peru?
right? So
It's like Guatemala?
right. So it, you have to play to that context to a degree, but then it took more education.
Wow, that's interesting. And this was back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, early 2000s. So, I mean, we were in a population.
That's mind-blowing, dude.
Well, it's mind-blowing and unfortunate because you have to...
It had to serve as a segue to
Right.
explain to people
Yes.
that islanders are
Right.
we're all not polys, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, when you say South Pacific, they will gravitate to the ones that they know. They'll say Hawaii, or
Right.
you're like, well, that's not technically South Pacific, but
Yeah.
you're trying to associate to what they have already imagined in their minds, and so we played that to a degree and had a successful restaurant in near Ashland, Oregon.
How does Eastern European cuisine relate to Pacific Islander cuisine? Like, how did you mend them?
How do we mend them? It's almost like having apples and oranges.
Right.
You had pierogies, which is kind of like I would say it's almost similar to having empanadas, but really small, and they were filled with cheese. And then we would have red rice and either fish, or we'll do stuff that we knew that they weren't as familiar with. And so we, did somewhat of, almost at a level of trying to introduce things little by little. So we actually, in Ashland's known for having the Shakespeare Festival, that it's pretty nationally recognized as having really quality Shakespeare plays. And so they would have a lot of, it's kind of basically a touristy city.
Ashland,
yeah.
Ashland
in Oregon.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we were the neighboring village, neighboring city to it, and they would come out with things about saying, what's the best restaurants, blah blah blah. And so we were the best restaurant outside of Ashland, and the fact that we were kind of this eclectic restaurant, where it was primarily known as an Eastern European restaurant, and then we introduced, the island menu. We felt that it was an accomplishment at a level that we felt manageable, but it wasn't the intent to have a restaurant. It was just that they just started it. And so that's what got me involved in politics, because when I was there, my folks they were teachers, they went to UOG. They basically got their, they were teaching here at both the education, elementary and high school level. And then when they moved over there, they didn't know how to run a small business. And so there were a lot of issues that we had to go through. A lot of patrons would complain about things with the city. And so that's what got me into it, is because I was like, well, someone needs to ask questions. And so when I went there, I felt like this somewhat of a underdog of, well, they're looking at me as if I don't know what I'm doing, and they might have a bias, and that might be my perception.
Right.
And so that's I'm always an individual who wants to push the boundaries. And so that's how I got involved in it. And so once they weren't able to ask the questions, I went ahead and signed up to a petition to go onto the council. and I unfortunately went against the most popular person in the community, but I had no idea. That was where, I tend to throw the rock and see where it falls
For
without
sure.
knowing exactly what's going to hit. And
How big was the population of the community?
it was
you're
pretty
in?
small.
Okay.
The town that I was originally in was about 6,000. So
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Like about the size of Jotnya.
okay,
Right.
okay, yeah. So it was we don't have the way that the village level of the I would say kind of the bureaucratic system is set up is considered as a strong mayor
Okay.
structure versus what we had was a weak mayor system where you have a mayor of elect and then you have council members who act as kind of the Senate. So we basically make sure that the policy making is going in the direction that everyone approves, and then really the mayor is more of a spokesperson.
So there's more of a wait. So you changed it from a strong to a weak, or weak strong to a weak, right?
Yeah, so
Okay,
I was comparing it to Jonia,
Right,
or
right.
to here, where I would assume it's more of a strong.
The mayors get their feet massaged here. I don't know if you've
No,
heard those stories.
Yeah, I've heard the article or the recording. too.
Yeah.
That's not normal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's that considered a strong mayor or a weak mayor, but we know his feet hurt.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I feel like that's something that maybe needs to be managed here. I always talk to my dad about, if the community here on Guam would be willing to change that sort of aspect of when it comes to mayors, right? You have mayors in the states who run communities sometimes bigger than Guam, but you have mayors here that manage a village that has 500 people, right? So isn't a mayor absolutely necessary for this place? Do we need that many mayors? There's just a lot of questions, and when it comes down to that policy level or political level, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to dive. We don't talk about politics on this
Right.
podcast. I don't want to dive too deep.
Especially if Mel comes around. Well, I mean, I think the nice what I've learned in my experience,
Mhm.
especially when you want to see change, even if it's on a small scale. I mean, right now I live in the city of Medford, which is about 70,000 people.
Okay.
I'm on the planning commission there, and when you want to see something change, it's just like any other way of addressing a government. I mean, the government's working for you. So as a citizen, you can basically ask questions, and if you hope that those who you put to those seats that you're wanting to get things, addressed,
Mm-hmm.
they would listen to you and hopefully give you a platform to make changes. So if they create a citizens advisory committee, or they allow you to be able to say, okay, if you're interested in, maybe making a change to the mayor, setup, then let's put together a citizens advisory group. Let's look at it and see what you guys can come up. I mean, it's a way of interacting. And a lot of times people say, oh, that's just for us. You're just pushing us to the side so we can do something else, and really don't want to. But at least you're doing something rather than just talking. And I think that's why I got involved, even though I wasn't, born and raised in Oregon. I was one of the probably the very, very few, or if any, the first probably minority person to
Mhm.
actually be on unfortunately, it's a good old boy system. I mean, we were in a rural community. Most people that get elected are elected because they have been there. They're from, maybe not as affluent, but they're
Their third generation, their family's been there for a long time.
yeah, or
kinda
they're just not,
involved.
unfortunately, a lot of folks who would be classed as minority don't just get those opportunities
Right.
to actually reach out. So I took the advantage of what I would have assumed of just, filling out the voters pamphlet. I used, from a strategy standpoint, I knew that people saw McManus as a way of, oh, this guy might be Irish. you
Yeah.
know?
Right.
So my photo wasn't there, and they were like, "Yeah,
Just
we
a
want
name.
this." Yeah.
Just an
At
outline
EJ
of your face.
McManus. Yeah. So, but I mean, it's a laughing matter. But I mean, that's it's all
It's what you had to do.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we all have. I mean, we all try to do that in a way to make sure that whatever you feel passionate about, you're going to try to make the actions in the way that supports it. And so, was it misleading? No. I mean, I use my strengths. I mean, I've learned especially from a professional standpoint, if you spend too much time trying to improve your weaknesses,
Right.
your strengths will also become a weakness.
Mhm.
So if you actually improve your strengths will then support your weaknesses. So I felt in that manner, just i.e. for just from a name recognition, I knew that that was an ability for me to be able to move forward in
Strategy, man.
Yeah. So in a very short answer to what you were asking, that's how I got involved in politics.
And how did that first petition turn out?
I mean, I did it just like, I mean, I was fairly new to the community. It was challenging, but I think people respected that. If you because you had to garnish signatures, and at that time it was only 20, so it wasn't too bad. So I went around the neighborhood and tried to knock on doors and said, hey, hi, my name is EJ,
Right.
and asked for the opportunity to be able to see if I can get your vote during a general election.
For sure.
And then that didn't get as much because going to someone's house, they obviously are it's more of a defensive mechanism because they're curious. They're not used to what I would think in Guam is very unique, where there's a lot of engagement. It's more of like, oh wow, the senators, the mayors, you have the cars driving around
and stuff,
right?
It's like, oh shit, he's at Kings. First seat, second seat, oh, in the back.
Right, yeah. It's very, I would say it's a little different. And so I actually went to Walmart and was just waiting at the entrance. And then when someone's coming up, if they looked inviting enough, I'll be like, hey, are you around from here? And try to make sure I can get their signature from there.
For sure. Yeah.
So, and that was scary in itself because...
Is that something that you said you felt like things needed to change, right? Because of the restaurant.
Right.
And because, what were the things that you guys were fighting for that seemed unfair, that you wanted to, because I was talking to Governor Calvo was on the podcast too. And he said, man, I didn't plan on running, but, for senator, but, there's things that I felt like needed to change. And I wanted to be that driving force for that change. So, and I feel like that's where politics in a person would eventually start, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think we all heard it. We've either been a part of the conversation. We've either been at the tables or the barbecues where they're saying, you know what, this is messed up. They're not able to, I'm always losing my power, or why do we always have to pay the extra taxes, blah, 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 or I'm not able to get my tax returns. So there's always a lot of conversations, but then there's always then who's actually trying to make those change, or who do we talk to? And I think who's
hearing us,
right? Yeah. Right. Right. And so that's what motivated me. I remember at the restaurant, there was probably more than just one thing that triggered it, but I remember one element of just, we had, our house was actually pretty close to the restaurant. And so we were running it almost like a family run business. I mean, we would get up in the morning, walk from the house up to the restaurant, which is about a block away, get prepped and then go back. And then I'm one of 7. And so all the
big
rest
family,
of all the other kids were still going through elementary school. My mom was pregnant at the time. That was number 7.
Are you the oldest?
Yes, I'm the oldest.
Okay.
I might be the finest looking. No, just kidding. Sorry, Matt.
I am one fine specimen.
Right. I am unfortunately the shortest.
I was just having this conversation with a friend. It's usually the oldest sibling who is the shortest one. I have multiple friends
really
who the oldest brothers are it's the second oldest. The second in line is taller than them, and I think it's common. It's got to be a common thing, man.
I always blame my parents because my parents had me when they were actually in high school.
Okay.
And so my mom was working at McDonald's, and I was like, it's because you fed me McDonald's all the time.
Hash brown.
Right. All those chemicals. Especially the one in Agania. That stuff never has mold. So this made me short and thick.
Right.
But anyways, where were we going on that?
You come from a family of 7.
Oh,
yeah.
Right. So I think the direction of trying to just be involved came from knowing that our family was really intermixed with the business, and so we actually had a car that was parked at the restaurant that was our family car, but someone had made a complaint about it because it wasn't moving. And so when the city officials came to basically give us a ticket, I responded to the city and asked, why did we get the ticket? And they said, come to City Hall. And so that's where the conversation got. And they were like, well, we just wanted to know why that car was there. And I was like, well, shouldn't that conversation have been just vocally rather than writing us the ticket or having someone? Because usually issues are complaint driven. That's what most policies are directed as. So in order to enforce it, it's really more complaint driven. So it took someone to complain about it. And that's what I felt was something that I wanted to be a part of. Like, why do we have certain policies the way that they are? And so that's
do you think
part of it.
Do you think people get stuck in the mindset of, since it's already been established, why try to change it?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think we're always going to be dealing with that. I mean, I think the intent to build trust on something that you've already been trying to accept ends up being a part of really your DNA. So if it's in professional life, if you have to work with a certain software, if it's personally, if you're with a relationship that you've invested into and you built the trust, you don't want to change that because you don't want to lose that trust in something new or something that has to make you go through that, growing or that, learning curve. Okay. And so I feel that that's always an issue, especially now working in the planning or being part of the planning commission. Nobody wants development that happens in their backyard or in their front yard. Because they always have this perception that, one, my place was a haven. My place was as perfect as it was. Right. And even though that might improve their property value, or maybe it actually deals with that, that unfortunate, pool of water that's always brought all the mosquitoes, they don't think about that. All they know right now is that one tree that's always been a part of, your backyard that they always see, that's going to be gone because someone's going to put the same type of house right next to you and you're all pissed off. Right. So that's how, that's my experience of, people always being defensive about change. And
shit, man, there's this field out here, right out here. You saw that big field?
Yeah.
So that's government land and they plan to put buildings there. And I'm like, no, that's beautiful. Like, you can put a park there. Right. Yeah, that could be a recreational center. Yeah, put some basketball courts, a track around it, and here I am. I sound like that guy. Like, no, don't change it. Right. It's government land. They should make it for the community.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and even with our phones, I mean, we're, these operating systems update, and they update most of the time to hopefully the end user. Right. And a simple change where you're like, oh, I used to do it this way, and now I have to try to learn it. You get upset. I mean, it's human nature. We assume that we're the owner of everything. And so when something happens and something changes, we get defensive, we get derogatory. Mm-hmm. But in reality, if it wasn't for change, we wouldn't be talking. I would have not been across the Pacific sending a message electronically saying, hey, what's up? We listened to your podcast the first time I heard it, was we were traveling to San Diego. None of that would have ever happened, So I think the peripheral vision of us looking forward is something that is always going to be it's a lifetime learning journey for all of us.
For sure.
I think we're never going to be satisfied because we're always going to be.
Do you think we'll never be satisfied because we get so complacent easily? Like people settle for like, I feel like the tradition here in Guam, and did I mention this last night? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that's what it's always been for a lot of businesses here on Guam.
Sure.
And the community as well, right?
Yeah. I mean,
why are we going to put a stop sign there?
Right.
I haven't seen anyone die there. It's like, no, but the kids cross. I didn't see it. I don't know.
No. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, you mentioned earlier about, this is somewhat of a different time. This is a renaissance moment where either it's Guam with a lot of other factors happening, or maybe if it's a generation factor. I feel like it's all subjective to what the mass community is dealing with. And I think from, if we were just to focus on Guam,
For sure.
we have everyone with different agendas that they're passionate about. There's independency, there's this buildup from the military, there's also a need from economic development to
Right.
growth. You also have a new governor, a new administration, and so there's always these roller coasters, and it's not very isolated to what Guam's doing. I think every other community goes through that. But if you are passionate about where you are and where you've been raised, you have a different perspective on it and want to feel like, okay, do we accept change, or do we fight for what has preserved our history? Because that's as much as our identity. We have to preserve the past, but we also have to strengthen the future, and we just got to be able to figure out whatever that journey is. And I think those who you've talked to that have been a part of this podcast, as well as those who are actively being a part of our community, both, professionally and socially, I think everyone's figuring it out. We all have to figure out that we're also in the same direction.
Right. How do we bring it all together?
Right. And that's a $1 million question that no one has an answer to.
That's 100 years from now question, I feel like.
Right. And it would be super easy if it was just this weekend, if we all could figure it out. And
Right.
usually that can happen. You could actually isolate that, because we've all been in those situations where we find out a friend's going to have a barbecue, or a friend's parents are gone.
Mhm.
Like, dude, we're going to have barbecue.
Yeah, right.
And everyone's like working.
Yeah, I just go to my house, bro.
Right. Who's going to bring the beer?
Yeah, what do you need? What do you need?
Right. So we know we can do it on a very micro level.
Mhm.
We just got to be able to do it. And you've seen it. Guam's done it so many different ways of
Yeah,
applying that.
for sure. Yeah, you can grab that.
We have a special guest at the door.
Here we go. Here we go. Duck under.
Unless it's
Oh,
ice.
there you go. Yeah.
Just kidding.
Coming to deport some people out of here. Hi, come on inside. Yeah. Matt, can you set her up and
Can her other half come in?
sure.
I think Ray could come in too.
Yeah. Okay.
Is it okay that I said his name?
Hi, nice to meet you. Yeah, we already got ahead and started, and you can jump on, make yourself comfortable. Matt will get you some water, and we're drinking some whiskey here. So if you fancy a glass, it is a fancy whiskey. It tastes fancy, and he's a gentle animal. But yeah, let's go
He's
back
not
to
talking about me.
yeah, and I'm not talking about you, Jake.
Hey, good to see you.
Hey, you too. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so
It-
wet out.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, it's the
5 minutes to get here.
the weather is bad. Yeah, you can pull that. You can pull that out, and I'll adjust this. Go ahead and pull it out to you. You can pull the whole thing, just so that the thing comes off the wall. There we go.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and just Matt will turn you up. You can put the headphones on, and yeah. Before you walked in, we were discussing. Oh my gosh, it escapes me.
Change. Policies.
Right, and
Culture.
how we can happen here. Well, we were talking on the micro scale. We're able to do it when a parent moves out, goes off island. We're like, shoot, come to the house. Everyone comes together and sort of brings their contribution of how to make something happen. And EJ was mentioning we just need to figure out. Everybody's doing something here on Guam. How do we figure out how to do it together? Right. And so, anything you want to add there, EJ?
Well, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it through the storm. But no, yeah, I think that and it's
No, we can
Perfect
go
timing
into
that
your
you're going.
your background and stuff. When
Right,
yeah,
yeah.
we'll
Well,
kind of
I
digress off the
I'm
off the
putting stuff
topic.
together on change. I think a focal point is oftentimes like what's necessary, and the focal point doesn't have to be like the person who is the champion of the cause.
You can bring her up a little bit.
doesn't have to be the person who's the champion of the cause or the effort or whatever. It could just be a person who's good at putting the pieces together, right?
Right. So you're talking about a mastermind.
That's right.
Right.
Right. And if they're a visionary,
would that be a strong mayor or a weak mayor? Right. You were saying the weak mayor has the council to put the things together, and then they would be the spokesperson of what everybody else would come in. You know, what the council has come together and decided for the community.
Yeah, I mean, both models are effective.
Right.
I think it's just where it's more appropriate for the community you want.
Right.
So
sorry, dude. He'll just give him some time and he'll be like, all right, I'm bored.
It's just Ray. He knows that there's two animals in there. But yeah, so as far as the weak and strong mayor structure, that's just a platform where if the community has set up, what we would call our charter, which is most what governments abide to, if the citizens feel like that's the best way, then you would hope that all the elected officials in that type of structure work in that model. And so I think for Guam, which is, gone through different administrations,
right.
Everyone's working on it. I think, and that's where my conversation with Mel was, you're always inheriting what has been started in the past, and you also have an agenda of what you want to see going forward.
For sure.
So it's how much resources you can be able to apply and be able to say, okay, I want this to be our goal. I want this to be something that we can say as an accomplishment. And it's hard, especially when you are trying to figure out things that happened in the past, and you're working in a system that, may or may not be as effective to the community that you want to serve.
Yeah, and sometimes time is a factor too, right? Time and budget and being able to make that all to come together. And it's a perfect segue to bring you in. You're EJ was mentioning you're the director of agriculture.
No.
What is it?
It's GEDA.
GEDA.
You're right.
What? Where did agriculture come from?
I think you were thinking of marijuana.
No, that might have been from Joe. I think Joe thought you were the director of agriculture. So
Okay.
you're the director of GEDA. Apologies.
yeah,
Biggest apologies.
Sure. No, not at all.
And so, as far as like economic development, first coming into the director's position, where do you see like is the next necessary step for us to improve? Is it tourism? Is it within building the inner economy and exporting something? Earlier, I was mentioning to EJ that our biggest export is talent, right?
Mhm.
And besides that, I mean, what are you seeing that'll be beneficial for us to move forward?
Sure. I think the next step for us is diversification, right? So, for a really long time in Guam, we've been really dependent on tourism and the military, and I think tourism and the military are both solid industries to have, and I think a lot of other jurisdictions aren't quite as lucky as we are. I know among the territories, Guam really stands out in the way that. Because of the importance, because of it being a strategic place, military-wise, we have a little bit more of an advantage over other territories, I suppose you could say.
For sure.
So I think ultimately, what we need is industry diversification. And so one of the things that Governor Luliangaro, when she came in, she was very interested in moving more towards agriculture, aquaculture, not just from the perspective of diversifying the industry so that we can kind of bring in more revenue to our island via exports, but also just for increased food security, less dependence on imports, and things along those lines.
But do you think the government is able to support something like that, or should that come from the individuals themselves? Like, should I have a garden out there and me gardening myself in my apartment? And is that something that should be encouraged, right?
Sure.
And maybe sell my green onions that I grew on the that I grew on the balcony.
Yes. Yes.
Are those green onions?
Yeah. Green
There's
onions.
3 feet.
3-foot green onions in the 5-foot plant. I mean, potting plant, planter.
Now, did you grow them from a seed or from other green onions?
Yeah, it would be the one from Payless, and then I just took whatever I cut and then just put it in the soil.
That's right, man. That's it. That's where it starts. That's where you got to start somewhere, man.
Right.
I think it's in all. I guess it's a multi-pronged effort. You know, I don't think the government can be the only one. I think the people of Guam. I think behavior change is something that we really kind of have to behavior change in the way that once upon a time, years ago when I was working with when we were doing farm to table. Well, I mean, farm to table's still going.
Which I think is great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's awesome.
So when farm to table got going several years ago, we'd get a lot of inquiries from people who would say, "Hey, girl, I got a son who can't get a job, and can you hire him?" And that kind of sort of, it was sort of like it was not a viable. It was basically the career path that was alternative to getting a real job or joining the military. Well, Masaya learned to farm, right? And I think that that's something that the trends have changed in the mainland. You're finding that the farmers are getting a lot younger. You're finding that the farmers are getting more diverse. There's a lot more women involved in agriculture. There's a lot of young people. There's a lot of college educated people. And I think it's because people are very fascinated by sort of, they put their science geek glasses on and they're interested in like growing stuff. You know what I mean? Like, growing more stuff than others, right?
These days.
People are interested in growing their greens.
Right.
And so I think over time that has really what you see is the desire of people to I think once upon a time over at UOG, agriculture as a major wasn't particularly popular.
Right.
It's kind of just like for hobbyists or people who were like, "Oh, so you're an ag major. That's cool. So what do you want to do with that?"
Yeah.
And "Oh,
You're gonna plant stuff.
yeah, exactly. And now it's sort of, and now, like I said, it's a different kind of,
It's a respected
it's a different
discipline.
demographic. Yeah. And so I think if you have a group that's interested and passionate about it, and if you have it from the perspective of food security, so you have kind of the public health aspect of it,
Right.
and you have the commercial aspect of it as far as if you are growing stuff and you want to get it sold, let's try to lift the barriers to getting that going. And then even to the extent of stimulating incentives for things like scaling your business so that you might be able to export. So I think there's so many parties that have to be involved all at the same time, and which goes back to
For sure.
the original thing we had talked about, which was like a focal point.
It honestly sounds like a 25-year plan.
Mhm.
Honestly, it's something that won't happen in the next year or the 2 years.
Yeah.
I could imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, just to find a plot of land to plant a bunch of shit is not is hard to find and hard to come by, right?
Mhm.
And to get people individually to want to work in the fields and in the hot sun all day, you're not gonna find many of them, right?
Right. And I think there's this notion of like there's a lot of this sort of urban farm movement you see in a lot of smaller cities, where they're taking sort of like abandoned parking lots and stuff like that and turning them into urban farms. Here in Guam, it's not necessarily an urban farm, but it's still sort of a really
It'll be a urban farm on a wall and then jungle.
yeah.
Coconut tree and sakati.
Exactly. So it's a little more wild,
That's already in my back of my mom's house.
but it's still
It doesn't have
still
to be
tiny.
urban.
Yeah.
As long as you don't bush cut your grass a week
Yeah.
with all this rain, what I've seen is like all of a sudden it's like there's instant growth.
Yeah, man.
The photos,
Especially in this rainy season, it's crazy.
Well, yeah, that's what a lot of people, one thing I didn't realize until I started working at Farm to Table, which was, I was like, oh yeah, there's a lot of rain. So that means shit can grow all the time.
Right.
And they're like, no, man, there's a reason why the majority of the food in America is grown in California where it never rains.
Right.
And I was sort of like,
Much rain.
oh, apparently when you can control the rain, it makes it much more productive. It's a much more productive type of situation.
Right.
The science of farming, right?
Right.
So
Nutrients aren't getting washed away in the soil as it rains, right?
yeah, exactly.
So
Mhm.
I mean,
And
I'm not a science major.
It's also
right?
it's disease.
right,
really.
right. mold, white
Yep,
flies, and
that-
all that
all
kind
that
of stuff, all that nice
dengue.
stuff. Yeah, the dengue. Oh my gosh.
But it's interesting you mentioned the farming because I have a cousin who's only a couple years older than I am, born and raised here, and I remember, I mean, this was like late '80s, '90s. They would be, they would set up the pig traps. They would do all that. They would actually, put their little pen together and try to hold all these the boars or the wild pigs. And he would try to do more hunting. And he's said lately, there's not a lot of people interested in game and wildlife. They're not fishing. I mean, you don't have the generation, I would say, that are up to, and I might be generalizing too much, but
Because we're all aircon babies.
right. Well, there's more deer. He said there's more deer around. Like before, you would only be able to hunt a few. Now you can pretty much get deer almost every.
Wasn't
every
there maybe like a few years ago, Anderson like killed a bunch of deer and they were giving it away for free to the mayors?
Yep. They were thinning out their overpopulation of deer. Something
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
that.
so I think it's. I mean, for sure, it's a multi-pronged approach, but I feel like
I mean, we have a killer dog population too.
that's true. But I feel like we don't. There are elements where if it's not preserved about the culture, the movement forward. Yes, you want to be able to try to say we can address this type of sector, or if it's related to social services or whatever the community needs. There is a change, on the macro level where it's not. It's going to be different.
Right.
And so, what do we keep that has been a part of Guam's culture to be a part of our future? Because if we don't come together on that, then we are making changes that are not necessarily preserving what we remember as being a part of Guam. And I'm not saying that that's a doom output, but I feel like we're at that moment where there's a lot of chatter, there's a lot of conversations, and I feel like that's where this storytelling, and you mentioned that earlier today, where we are. I think that's part of Guam's culture is we're great storytellers. We're great.
Right.
We like to bullshit.
Right.
the barbecues.
We
with
like
our,
to know. We like to know it all too.
right. So we need to continue that, but continue it where it's also effective and not just necessarily just talk.
Yeah, I think as long as tradition allows society to evolve, that's when I think that it'll be good for it. You can find tradition holding things back. I mentioned earlier the traditional mindset of it ain't broke, don't fix it mindset has held a lot of people back and maybe kept a lot of businesses in the 90s because, hey, we've been doing it this way. Why are we going to change it? Right. There's no reason to change it. It's working. Look, it's turning on.
It's working.
I can change the channel.
Yeah.
Right.
And if it's not working, it's somebody else's fault. It's not my fault.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be able to maintain and evolve and like you said, there's so many facets that go into it, but what takes precedence, or if there's anything that should take precedence, what is it? And if not, how do we work together in unity, right? Where there can be actual pride in progressive movement here on Guam.
Right.
Well, I think, progressive for sure. I mean, I think that's where, if you're going to make that effective, you can be trying to, I read a book recently about juggling elephants, and maybe it's more applicable in Guam of juggling carabao.
Right.
But everyone's going to always have a lot of things happening in their life, either both professionally, in relationships, or just even with individually, looking at yourself.
Right.
And so from a community standpoint, if there are a lot of facets that are happening, the expectation is that you're putting community leaders into positions that are going to work for what you feel is best for your village and for the entire island. Then you would hope that the leaders are also putting individuals like Mel and other folks who are part of these policy-driven agencies to be able to say, yeah, we might be 25 years out to get something done, but we're actually starting to do those implementations now.
Right.
And so I feel like, yes, we could always go through the mindset of this is always the way it's been, that's just Guam, that's Guam style, whatever. But in reality, we are the ones who are juggling those things of needing to be done.
Yeah.
So we need to be able to prioritize that, make sure that there's an action in place, and hope that there is this communication that is motivating our leaders to say, hey, you're in that position, you're the one who's accountable to the outcome, and we're not going to let that go. And I think,
Yeah, we're all depending on you.
yeah, so we're all
Fate of our island.
Right,
Yeah.
you're right. From the planning standpoint, are there things that you see going on out there in Oregon that can be adopted here on Guam, and scaled?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, I mean, on at least, and I've both done work on a local level, both in regional and in state. I think all other jurisdictions and all municipalities similar to Guam, everyone's trying to copy from someone else.
For sure.
And so, I was actually telling Mel this yesterday. I don't want to be that dick that says, hey, I learned this over here and I think you guys are not doing it. Because you always, every time, I remember when I was in Guam, you always have people visiting and be like, we did this in Guam, and Dairy Queen's going to be the answer to everybody.
Well, go back to Dairy Queen then, bro.
So I don't.
Ipan Mobile for life.
So I think there's a fine line.
Right,
I think you don't want to repeat mistakes, but you have to make your own mistakes to be able to move forward.
For sure.
So as far as we do a lot of land use planning. I know that Guam has their territorial planning commission. I think there are a lot of challenges that are almost reciprocal to what the main land deals with.
Mm-hmm.
Land doesn't grow. You're limited to what you have. So really, long-term planning is
unless you're Hawaii, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's
Big
not going to
island.
happen in the next
Big Island's still growing.
100 years. So that's where I think a lot of our communities, there's one thing that I've seen a change in the last 17 years
Mhm.
is that they're starting to do this long-term planning. They're actually getting individuals who are doing more long-term planning rather than just dealing with policies that are needing to be addressed
Like
now.
the now, right?
Yeah, so they're working on 15, 20-year plans and trying to implement those. They're doing a lot of feasibility. They're a lot of doing analysis. And so that might be an opportunity that Guam, and they might actually be doing it now, but, that's where if individuals start realizing that this is the only resource we have, then you start getting out of that, I'm only going to work till the end of the year because that's what I know I have to do.
Right.
If they realize, okay,
Make it.
I have to keep doing it.
fiscal year end.
Right. So I think that's, I would say from a very high level, that's the challenge of trying to take certain elements from different governments, that the way they apply their policies, because I would say it may not be as effective here in Guam. And Guam actually has a pretty robust, not necessarily overall process, but I feel a lot of individuals already cross-pollinate from knowing what is being applied on a very national level all the way down to even from the neighboring islands. And so that's where, I've learned in my experience of, you can never say my community is doing this right, so you need to start following me because you're going to put your foot in your mouth. So.
Right. Do it like this.
Right. Yeah.
My way or the highway, right?
Yeah. Or you don't also want to be cocky and come in and be like, oh yeah, you need to be able to do this, and then it ends up failing because one, it didn't apply in the community, and then two, you didn't do your homework.
Yeah, we expect it to be cookie cutter and expect us to fit in the shape that it was cut for them, right?
Yeah.
Without actually like taking a look at it and managing it and tailoring it to benefit the community, the
Right.
local community.
Well, I think a lot of times what happens is one person has an idea and they have the political clout to move it forward to a certain point. And what happens is they don't involve their stakeholders up until that point, and then the stakeholders start hollering, and then it's shelved. Whatever that idea may be.
Right.
I'll give an example. Over at down in Tumon, there's the area where the old folks live. It's called Guma Tranquilidad.
Right.
And I believe at one point in time, very, very early on this year, the director at the time, or the director, who's still the director, not the director at the time, the director of Gora said something to the effect of like, yeah, we're open to the idea of exploring, moving these folks and building
Building a
something
hotel,
else,
like a
building
hotel. Right,
something
I
like
remember that.
And then that caused an uproar, right?
Right.
It caused an uproar. And I swear that shelved even considering it as an idea to make people's lives better. Not just these 50 seniors that live in this spot, but possibly hundreds of other seniors or thousands of other seniors that are underserved, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so it was like, but the thing is, I think if all of these ideas that we have, if we say, if we start with something very broad and thematic, like we want to make the best use of government assets to be able to generate money, revenue, and this revenue that we generate shouldn't be directed towards giving people cushy jobs or big raises or kind of the continued perception of abuse. Instead, we want this revenue to be channeled into good, positive things. Increased parks and recreation types of facilities, clean bathrooms,
Right.
Throughout our island, and opportunities for our kids, opportunities for our Manumku to have a long, fruitful sort of the sunset years of their life, right? And I think from the holistic perspective, right, if we looked at it and said, and then things like that, those one-off comments about that one spot there or that one spot there, it doesn't become this really sort of emotional polarizing issue and this anecdote that then scares the hell out of people for years and years and years to come. Nobody's going to touch Guma Tranquilidad for the next 20 or 30 years. And one can argue on one hand, it's like, respect your Manamku for God's sakes.
Right.
Why are you trying to kick him out, Mel?
Right.
Not the case at all. But it's more along the lines of, why can't we be open? Why do we have to shut down this idea before we even explore it even further? How about that's a terrible idea if you don't have something better to give those 50 people that are living in that
Or if you
spot.
build the hotel, give them free, or build a condo, give them free condos to stay at in that place, develop it.
Right.
There has to be a compromise somewhere, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing is when people don't even want to open themselves up to compromise, right?
Right.
That is when.
Not that I'm for it or anything. I'm just
No.
it was just kind of just playing.
You heard it.
Yeah. Playing the devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Yeah, right.
Sure. Yeah. And not that anyone is either for it or against. I don't really spend a whole lot. I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking.
Right. You don't lose sleep over it, right?
Yeah, over Guma Tranquilidad or the outcome of what goes on down there. But the thought is just sort of, don't kind of dismiss this idea before we even, or maybe like I said, maybe it's just from the perspective of the broad thematic kind of thought of best use of government assets. Okay, let's get our stakeholders involved now. Let's talk about the areas that are off limits. Let's talk about the areas that are culturally sensitive. Let's talk about the areas that there's, that are hot, right?
Right.
And let's plan around them.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think kind of telling on that, I think a lot of times, and I've seen it from policymakers, they don't follow the business model that is always being taught to successful companies, where do your homework, do your market study, create a strategy, continue with your brand, and then be able to hit the outcome that you want. Sometimes there's more complex, and because it's already a moving target, especially when you're being elected, there's already things in place. You're the one who now has to be accountable to it. But there's a missed opportunity for, at least in my opinion, where policymakers, elected officials, don't realize that they're in a business, and that business is serving the people. Mm-hmm. So if you want to get something done, if you've been enacted to say, okay, our goal for whatever time frame that you're being given, then treat it as if that is the product development schedule that you have to do, or treat it as, okay, this is the phase that we have to go through in order for us to expand to a development or whatever, needing more resources. And I feel like some folks get it, some folks don't, because they want to follow what you were talking about earlier. This is the way that we've always been doing it,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna be. You tell me when you want your broken car picked up, and I'll pick it up, and then just sit. they just sit in their
We're just gonna go put
office.
it somewhere else.
Right, yeah. We're just gonna move it over to.
We're just
Tunica.
take it out of your site and my site.
So I feel that that's I've seen that happen a lot, and again, my experience more has been on the state side, and I'm sure it's very reflective to over here. And so I think that now we have the opportunity to start asking questions and actually make folks be more accountable to be like, oh no, you can't do that the way that you've been always doing it. There's more eyes. People now are able to record exactly what you say.
And everyone has an opinion now.
Right.
And it can be heard.
Mhm.
Right.
Whether you want it or not.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you said this is not being recorded so we can say whatever we want.
Oh, wait, you didn't press record?
Shoot.
We've been talking for how long? You didn't press record?
This will live forever. This will live forever.
I know, I got to remember what I said.
I know. I think of sometimes I think of the really dumb shit I said, like on stage or something like that, or some joke I've cracked.
I know, I totally.
And I was thinking to
Earlier.
myself, like, oh my god, this stuff lives on forever.
Yeah, that was a great small business forum.
What was it about today?
It was called Small Beginnings, Big Opportunities, or something along those lines. That was the theme.
Is this something that's common that
I think
happens?
Guam does it once a year.
Okay.
And it's to I think it targets their small business customers and prospective customers.
Okay.
And what they do is today's keynote speaker was Frank Shimizu from Ambrose.
Okay.
And but prior to Mr. Shimizu, there were a couple panels. There was a panel, and there was a couple. I did like a 5-minute talk about, I don't know, about myself.
Tips to be successful.
Earlier you were mentioning diversity. There's another thing I want to ask you too earlier,
Sure,
but
sure.
you were mentioning diversity, and then you kind of jumped into agriculture and the diverse aspects of agriculture. But what also, like, being in your position, what else are you seeing that we can diversify on? Would it be intermingling of different industries, whether it be tourism, and earlier me and EJ were talking about the entertainment industry and stuff like that. Are those opportunities that can be explored? I've even talked to Don and Kel Munya, the Munya Bros, about how people that are using images of Guam, how do we get them and tax them for using images of Guam and shooting videos, whether it be a porno or a karaoke song video.
Sure.
Or
together.
reality, yeah, or together. Sorry, or a reality show
All at the
together.
Simultaneously.
right. And how do we capture those things that we can be potentially like losing out on, right?
Sure. I mean, I think oftentimes it's really a battle of priorities, and of course, I mean, in government, it's a battle of priorities and funding, right? And so I think something that I know that that we're really excited about is just more, so we have all these telecommunications, these undersea cables coming
sure.
through Guam. And so one of the thoughts has been, for the sake of redundancy, for the sake of redundancy, why don't we put up some data? Why don't we get some data centers coming in through here or something along those lines?
Right.
Now, I would not consider
hello, Capital Express credit card. How may I help you? Like that, like a call center?
No,
Or-
not call centers, like data centers.
Oh,
where
like
they-
holding information,
Yeah.
like storages. Right.
Yeah.
I think it's too hot.
data
But
center
anyways, yeah.
storages are not like the sexiest aspect of technology that we could possibly like deploy on
For
the
sure.
island. However,
That building right there holds 300,000 picobytes of data.
right.
All right.
Having said that, if you kind of get the ecosystem going,
Mm.
right, the technology ecosystem going, I mean, maybe with the access to Asia, with the access to like the Philippines, Japan, Korea, all the talent coming out of there, in the form of different mediums, art and film and music, et
For
cetera,
sure.
et cetera, then perhaps Guam could become some kind of like I said, art. Maybe we could have a more vibrant technology ecosystem, because I think one of the things I've observed is that the entrepreneurial spirit here is alive and it's vibrant, and people want to do their own thing. I mean, there are 200 people today at this conference, and as I was talking to them, I would ask them, I would say, "So do you have a business?" And they would say, "Well, not yet. but
Right.
I really want to open one, or or
I have a badass idea.
yes, I have an idea, or
Right.
it's just in the beginning stages, it's infant stages of existence.
Yeah,
and
we were mentioning about the Renaissance here. There's a
Yeah.
Renaissance happening here on Guam, and and
Sure.
entrepreneurship is along that lines of it,
sure
of people taking a chance on themselves.
taking a chance on themselves 100%. And I think one of the ingredients that's missing is that you have the entrepreneurship, you have the passion, you have the drive. And hell, a lot of kids are still living with their parents,
Mhm.
so they got the backup. They're
Right,
not going
right.
to go homeless.
Right. Or
So
hungry.
what is missing, and it's possibly to some extent the infrastructure from the perspective of how to innovate. I just like the tools for innovation. So, like for example, I was mentioning to someone today. I think I asked one of the speakers. His name is I forgot. Anyways, I was asking him about he's marketing. He does commercial production, and he deploys the marketing across various forms of social media. And I was like, oh, so do you know like a web developer that could build a website and an e-commerce website? And he was like, yeah, no, not really my thing. And I was like, okay, can you give me a referral to someone? Just assuming like,
Right.
if you do taxes, someone who gives advice on stocks, and someone who sells insurance.
Right.
Not the case in technology, or not the case in digital media necessarily here in Guam. And so I'd love to see. I think one of the areas that we're exploring getting some funding for is some sort of technology incubator, wherein we can kind of just try to create this, or just strengthen the community of artists and strengthen the community of entrepreneurs, so that they can add that additional layer of innovation to whatever their idea is. So if they want to start a local brand, great, start your local brand. But in addition to your brick and mortar, or in addition to selling out of the back seat of your or your trunk of your car and a pop-up shop here and there,
Mhm.
also get it online, deploy it right away, get
For
it
sure.
out there, promote it, etc.
So does that start with education, like educating maybe the youth, or educating outside in the community, whether it be on the village level, or on whatever is bigger than the village level? Would it start there, or
I
would it?
kind of think it might be a little bit I don't know, maybe interest, whatever your interests are centered around, perhaps. So like for example, if you have artists, then it becomes, how do you monetize your art somehow,
Right.
right? Through technology. If it's filmmaking, or if it's
Well, there are people who are doing it, right?
yeah. And so it's accelerating that existing. So what's happening sort of organically.
Can you just bring the mic to you?
Sure.
Yeah, so you don't have to keep bending down.
So
Yeah.
rather than so what's happening sort of organically already,
Mhm.
to kind of to put some sort of maybe government backing behind it, to get it accelerated and get it going that much faster. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think in the past, so the Guam Economic Development Authority for a really long time was the agency that went out and got the government of Guam bonds. So we're the ones that went out and got debt for. We're the ones that went out and helped the government of Guam finance this, or finance that, or build this, or refinance this, make sure, or whatever. And I think public finance is one sliver of economic development. Community economic development
For sure.
is really what's
I mean,
a
it's in
huge
the
priority.
name too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and when I first started the job, I said, I did the usual sort of like, what is economic development? No, I didn't do that. But
What did they put me in here exactly for?
but I looked at
When do I get off?
yeah, what should I be doing every day? Right? And,
Right.
So the first thing you do oftentimes is you look at your peers, like what is everyone else doing? So I was like, so I went to college in New York. So I was like, okay, what are they doing in New York? NY Economic Development. Oh, New York Economic Development and NY EDC. Okay, what about these guys? Oh, wow. Oh, that's a nice website. Or,
Right.
And just learning more about what these other organizations are doing and saying. And
For sure. As we were saying, just taking a piece of a little bit of everything from everywhere and applying it to here and scaling it, right?
Yeah, totally. With regard to the film industry, you're absolutely right. There's so much that's it's a challenging industry. At one point in time, GEDA was charged with putting up the film office, and so the commission when we came in January, we were given Speaker Tina Munoz Barnes gave us kind of a list of prospective names. The governor, we had a list of prospective names. The community of filmmakers, of sort of the experienced ones that everybody knows, like the ones you
Mooney
mentioned,
Bros, right?
Mooney Brothers,
Yeah, Mighty Island.
it's kind of small.
Very,
Yeah.
very small. Yeah.
And so, and not only that, but they're trying to work and pay their bills and do all kinds of other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so to get these guys together in a meeting to be like, okay, let's ratify the rules of the Guam Film Office.
Right,
You know?
right.
It was a little bit. It was kind of a challenge. And then the idea was brought to us. They said, "Hey, would you like to shift this over to PBS because perhaps PBS can somehow leverage some funding that they're getting at the same time. That maybe the benefit could be whatever money comes in can somehow benefit the public broadcasting or something along those lines."
For sure.
And I thought that was an excellent idea. I think the biggest thing, like I said, is the battle of priorities and funding. And it's one of those situations where it's like, well, with movies, it's a big risk, and it could be an excellent return for the blockbuster movies.
Right.
But the likelihood of getting those blockbuster movies, it's sort of like, we're kind of dealing in uncharted territory. So I think the best thing to do with the film industry to really get it off the ground and get some teeth going, as far as get some teeth in it to move it forward, would be for industry stakeholders, in addition to some external parties, just to sit down and say, let's put together a plan. This is the direction we want to go. All we want to do, we're going to target the karaoke video market.
Right.
And that's what we're going to do for the next
porno market.
5 years.
Right,
or,
right.
well, yeah, whatever it is,
Right.
Adult entertainment.
Right. Sorry. I should be more PC. Sorry.
No matter what,
That's what I heard.
Right.
That's what's said on the streets.
Okay. I agree with you. I'm going to start going with that from starting now. Yeah.
So whatever it is, we got to, whatever it is we choose, we just got to do it right.
Right.
And do
For
it
sure.
Well.
For sure.
Well, and I think going back, for sure it's a multifaceted. I mean, I know on a regional level, we've dealt with workforce growth and being able to help that be a factor in stimulating economic development. So I've worked with an organization, Rogue Workforce Partnerships. They were acting as somewhat of a management agent with a lot of other state agencies related to employment or other nonprofits that were providing resources to those who wanted to improve their education in traded sector based skills, or just be able to find a job. And so what they did is that their executive director basically took the initiative of kind of making sure that workforce loyalty to the community started all the way down to elementary, where they started to just show that the employers that were doing, that there were the major employers in the community were more present in the schools, as well as providing somewhat sponsored programs as they started to go up through the grades. And so by the time they were in middle school or even in high school, they already had traded sector based programs that were being funded.
You were already tailoring kids
right
to the development of the society, right?
Right. And so it was you all of a sudden had this ecosystem because
Right.
you weren't exporting talent. They all of a sudden had a loyalty of understanding why there's a value of this specific wood manufacturing company. We in Medford, we've got a lot of different types of industries. I mean, in fact, what was ironic is the trolleys that are going up and down Tumon, those are made in Southern Oregon. Those are actually manufactured, produced in Medford, which I had no idea. But I went through this warehouse, and these guys who were actually cabinetry makers, I mean, they were making cabinets for construction.
Right.
And someone had come to them and wanted to make some custom trolleys for using it for tourist base, and it just took
happened
off.
to happen here.
Yeah, well, they do it for both. I mean, they do it.
Oh,
for
that
a
was
lot
their origin of why they started.
Yeah, so they
Okay,
do it
okay.
for Hawaii. They do it for Guam, Dubai. I mean, they export product. They don't export talent, and I think that's where.
So keep the talent here.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's what's happening right now is that there's a drain, right? They call it the brain drain, and the brain drain is happening everywhere. I think even my girlfriend mentioned that South Korea is going through a brain drain. They're trying to figure out, like, how do we keep our educated citizens here?
Right.
And the automatic and you yourself, me, you went to school in New York, and right, that's what you mentioned, and the automatic thing when you graduate from high school is to leave off island, go to school, get a good education, with the very slim chance to come back. Right? It took me 5 years to come back. You visit, I'm sure, every now and then, but you've been gone for 17 years, and I don't know how long you
Yeah.
stayed before
I was
stayed off island before you
I
came back.
home a long time. I mean, I came home about 6 years.
Okay.
After about 6 years.
After 6 years of being out there, right? So it'll vary between 1 year to 30 years, 45 years before people decide they want to trickle back.
Right.
And that staggered amount of people and educated people and different minds that can benefit this place is unpredictable in that respect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, and it's not bad to leave.
not at all. Yeah.
I mean, you have. I mean, a lot of the education of what Guam has happened also off island. I
Right.
mean, you've got, we've got Pubechu, where they started a very, good culinary identity in San Francisco.
Right,
So that's,
right.
I mean, that's cool for that type of situations where we are not necessarily being almost assumed that we can only go to the beach side of where this is the only way that will be valuable. I think, I mean, just like every other country, it doesn't matter where you are. It just needs to be able to know where you came from. And I
Right.
think that's where if Guam could start providing or I shouldn't say start, but continuously try to work on making sure that those who do have a passion on growing an idea and wanting to be able to make sure it is established in Guam or promotes Guam, then let's figure out how we do that. I mean, going back to your technology infrastructure discussion, it doesn't have to also just be hardware. I mean, if we ended up providing programs where you had technically advanced individuals who went through a program through UOG or GCC, they had the certification of going through and doing remote work on computers, etc. Now that we have the ability to probably have instantaneous access to a lot of other countries, maybe that is a not necessarily a data center, but we now have an ability where people are able to work from here, have the fiber connection, and be able to do more work that usually they would have to either get people from China to do it or on their own island. But now they know that maybe Guam has this hub of technology advanced educated individuals who are specialists in some type of computer
sure.
program or software program.
Yeah, one of my friends, John Bermudez, he's a graphic designer, and he has clients all over the world, and that's what sustains him. And he does it from here, and then he gets nomadic every now and then, and he goes and travels and does his thing, but he still is able to work on those time zones.
Right.
And yeah, it's totally doable. And I think as far as like on the local level of like fostering it, I've come up with this idea before. I was telling you earlier that I truly believe Agana is the place where the identity is going to be found, right? One day Agana is going to be that bustling place it was back in the 40s, back in the early 1900s, and that's how people are going to remember it. And this is where like I said, the identity is going to flourish. And it's, if we can encourage people who do want to start businesses and do want to start their ideas and get it off the ground, it has to work hand in hand with people who own buildings. How many abandoned buildings are here in Agana alone that could be used for people to use? Well, why not break it down, build a parking garage, and then you can only park in Agana, and everywhere else, everything you have to walk here.
Mm-hmm.
And so Agana will essentially become a walking village, right? Or if you own land or you own a building, you get some sort of tax cut or a tax break if you're catering, or if you're opening up your building and giving local business owners at a cheaper price to rent out the building, you can sort of get that return in a tax break, right?
Right.
So, well, and I think at least, and I'm not educated enough to know how the government of Guam has followed from a structural standpoint on policies, but on a city level, you stick to that by having this comprehensive plan. So, you have your elected officials work with your staff or administration to basically create a comprehensive plan that has all these elements, from planning to your infrastructure to your codes of development or ordinances, or things that obviously keep the system running.
Right.
That comprehensive plan gets updated. A lot of times communities forget about them and then just start going off on agendas based on the administration that's come in. But it's up to, again, going back to the elected officials that you put there, you have to put them to that accountability of, is the plan that you set place 2 years ago, 5, 10, is that still applicable to our community now?
Right.
And if it isn't, where do we not just make a 180, but where do we start making changes to start planning for the future? Where is that, where the comprehensive plan is supposed to look out, the 30-year outlook, or whatever the expectancy you want? I think that's the best investment you can put in a community where you're always weary, because I will be as weary of my own government back in the States. But you should, because you're paying taxes for them to work for you.
For sure.
And so there are a lot of things that are happening, and so you always have to be cognizant of what's going on and making sure that they're actually effective. And I think that's where, if I'm sure that there's something in place like that, or I'm not as again familiar with obviously what goes on.
I feel like here on Guam, it's only when something bad or drastic's happening. Look, when the riots happen, it's like town hall meeting, right? Or or the dudes with the machetes in the street, it's like, oh, town hall meeting. Right. But it's not something that it's common where people are actually engaged in the community on a day-to-day basis, right? I feel like there's many problems here in Agana, but I don't know when the next town hall meeting is where I can express my concerns as a resident of Agana. Right. How many other citizens in Agana, better yet, how many other citizens in different villages, whether it be Sinanya, Maritzo, Jigo, Dededo, are able to express those same concerns, and do elected leaders on that mayoral level want to hear it, right? And are they able to fix it in that capacity?
Right. I think reactive, sometimes, it seems like the fires are, putting out the fires, by the time you've put out the fire, you're so exhausted that being proactive about asking somebody about something that is not necessarily, or perhaps there's been an effort towards going out and seeking that, soliciting that support, but people aren't compelled to come out unless there's a riot. Mm-hmm. You do know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I live in the village of Mangilao, and I've never thought to go to a town hall meeting until the
Right.
the machete thing happened, and I was like, I better go down there and say something.
Right, and yeah.
So it's kind of a, I don't think there's anything wrong with proactive messaging and communication for sure. And actually just making available, even if it's not whatever it is, making available, opening the lines of communication, right? I think is a lot of what it is. One of the things I was going to mention was in the city of Detroit, which was a mess. It was bankrupt, tons of default on debt, homes being abandoned. It was a blighted city, right? And everybody read about. I mean, have you guys ever seen anything about Detroit like a couple of years ago?
I know it was pretty dilapidated.
You could buy a house for like $1, that sort of thing. And Detroit, by and large, is staging one hell of a comeback right now, and a lot of it has nothing to do, or what it has to do. It's not nothing to do, but it's a combination of public and private involvement in revitalizing and reviving this city. And most of it has come in the form of capital being introduced into the city somehow. So you have like a bank like Capital One, who said, if you open up a business in the city of Detroit, we're going to give you an extremely low interest loan, right? Or the city that
incentive.
Said, we're going to give you guys incentives to open up here. We're going to make, and not only that, but then you had artists, or you had would-be entrepreneurs saying, oh, there's incentives. There's incentives to be there. There's easy access to capital to get my business off the ground. Oh, and there's houses for like $20,000 that I can buy for my, for my new
acre lot, right?
Right. And so it's this combination of things that caused it. It was, these are the new pioneers that they're basically rebuilding the city. And I don't think that Guam needs to get to the point where we're so like blighted and depressed that people come back and kind of, there's blood on the streets, and that's when people kind of start snatching stuff up.
Right.
I don't think it needs to get to that, but I think there needs to be a concerted effort towards capital. So right now, traditional capital is what businesses rely on. When was the last time you met a venture? When was the last time you ran into a venture capitalist at Kitchen Lingo, or at the venue?
Nope, never.
Maybe like last Wednesday.
I was just talking about the chicken Kelligwin at Tofu Smart.
Yeah. If you want to know where the best chicken Kelligwin is, ask me.
It's right there.
So your access to capital is pretty traditional. We go to our banks for money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Access to resources to get my business off the ground. Same old stuff. You go to One Stop or you go to Rough Tax,
For sure.
and you go through this whole process.
Right.
How on earth is that supposed to bring millennials and their bright ideas? That is a very uninspiring process.
For sure.
And then you want to rent a place here on the island, and the only rentals available are $2,400, $2,600 military
Right. Prices.
rentals,
Right.
or little dumps in kind of sketchy looking buildings,
Right.
and stuff like that. So it's like, how is that
It's like
created?
as is.
Yeah. In order for people to get a good setup, you got to have the hookup of some kind. You have to network already.
Right.
So how are we ever gonna? What are we gonna do for those folks who don't have those things? How do we? First, do we even want a whole slew of hipsters happening into a hookup? Yeah, I don't know. I'm neither here nor there about it. Really. I'm from Manila. That's why I applied to.
Limited. Let's limit them.
We want to choose them.
Hey, my jeans weren't that tight.
Wait, we'll take the buskers, okay?
Yeah.
Take the buskers.
You back on the plane, Frank. Back on the plane. Son.
Well, I think we were talking about that earlier. I think, every community goes through that. They always want to see if it's working effectively somewhere. They would be like, oh, that could be applied here.
Right.
But in reality, is that a strength of your community? And I'm sure Guam knows what their strengths are, and trying to go for ideas or opportunities that are not somewhat aligned. That's where, I don't want to be beating a dead horse, but you hope that your leaders are looking at that. And I feel like if Guam knows that they have certain strengths of, okay, yes, we have an opportunity to have these technology improvements, infrastructure, or maybe we're a destination for folks who are wanting to be traveling, retired living individuals. So do we create hotels that are specified for or specific to the elderly, or in that realm, or the fact that a lot of the tourists come from Asia based, what specific needs do they tailor outside of tourism that make Guam a part of a destination that be more economic development? So that's where I hope that it's not a fad-based witch hunt where we're trying to, make it a buzzworthy moment where you have elected officials going through re-election and they're like, okay, now that we know millennials or those who are going to vote the most are interested in Korean pop. Now we're going to say that we're going to start wanting to have Korean pop bands be here and have whatever, and it's all short-sighted. So I feel like that's where well,
like Mel mentioned,
it's always happened.
Reactionary, right?
Yeah, reactionary.
Kind of looking at the landscape and like, that's what we got to do. We got to bring it here. All right, let's bring in a whole bunch of people.
Right. Commitment. I think that's what that's what we need leadership wise, but also from our young people is commitment to creating the Guam that you want. Right. So if it's
be an actual stakeholder.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what Guam is this sort of like there's this frenzy around something hot and new and novel, and then it just kind of burns out.
Yeah.
We see this with a lot of new businesses,
right,
where lines out the door, and then all of a sardines, they're empty.
Right.
Right. And so I think it's commitment to the kinds of businesses that you want to see, and supporting them, making and just saying that's how if you want the bookstores, if you want the neighborhood bookshops, then stop ordering your books on Amazon.com. Period. Just commit to that. Right. If you don't care, then you don't care. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's something that if we can get out of this sort of fad behavior of the sort of the reactionary, putting out fires, special interest, right? Running or policy making geared towards where we are in the election cycle.
Are you running for senator too?
No,
senator
no.
mindset right there.
No.
Wait, what?
What?
No.
Special
Breaking news.
I already work.
Special report on Maserando.
I already work for the people of Guam. It's quite the challenge.
Yeah,
enough,
for sure.
Possibly enough for me. But I think that's where it's commitment. You have to decide. Like, I mean, I think that, like, when I moved home, a lot of people around me would just be like, man, it's not like the States where we can get higher paid jobs. We could do this, we could do that. And I was like, quit your bitching, man. Let's just like make the best of what we have and try to do something good for our island.
For sure.
And stick to it. Don't just run around. I mean, when we started Farm to Table, when we got the CSA off the ground, this is the crates with the vegetables, right? I swear to God, we had like 100 subscribers. And then over time, people were like, oh, I don't know if I really want to eat my vegetables every week. And then it's sort of, and now we have a good, solid, membership, I suppose. We do have a good, solid membership of CSA subscribers, but it's sort of like, where are all the people posting, hashtag
healthy living,
grown here, not flown here, whatever, right? And so it's that sort of kind of immature mindset that in my mind I'm like, maybe if we all exercise a little bit more commitment and maturity towards the kind creating the kind of Guam we want, right? That's what'll get us there.
Does can I ask?
Oh, of course.
Just curious, as far as your direction moving forward with GEDA, is there this anticipation where if Guam was looked as from a economic development standpoint regionally as a hub, and maybe not necessarily providing resources to support the other Micronesian islands, but somehow partnering or creating some type of, you mentioned public-private partnerships, but I don't know if there's another platform that is relative to where it's incentivizing other nations and other islands to be part of Guam's economic development improvement, because I feel then that would be an anchor that would start to solidify Guam as being stable, and then not necessarily looking at outside of our waters of trying to find other talent or moving talent out there.
Well, there's this hot new. Well, it's a Trump policy. It's opportunity zones, and
I've heard about it.
Opportunity zones are basically a capital gains type of tax abatement or capital gains tax shelter, wherein if you have a U.S. based capital gain. So let's say you own a home, and your home is when you bought it, it was $100,000. When you sold it, it was $900,000 because it's in San Francisco. And you sold it, you have an $800,000 capital gain. You should have to pay a 15% capital gains tax. But if you reinvest that capital gain, so if you reinvest what was the original? It was a $800,000 capital gain. If you reinvest that in an opportunity zone, then for a specific amount of time, for I think it's a period of I think about 7 years, then any growth that you get on that subsequent business is not taxed, or it escapes capital gains tax. So the first and then your first round of capital gains from the 800,000 is lowered. So you get a discount on your capital gains, your initial capital gains. Then you get a complete avoidance of your second round of capital gains from your second business. Now, along those lines, the reason I tell that story is because all over the United States, you got opportunity zones. Okay, so you got opportunity zones in Hawaii, in California, and Alaska, and Washington, Michigan, wherever. Here in Guam, we also have opportunity zones. But for a really long time, Guam was always marketed as, at least GEDA always marketed itself as quote unquote America and Asia, same time zone, couple hour flights to Japan, Hong Kong, etc. So I mean, you talk about kind of Guam as a hub. The things we can do with regard to like shipping, we're always going to be governed by things like the Jones Act, okay? And cabotage when it comes to flights coming in and out, or carriers that, flying in from all over Asia and carrying people around, right? So we are currently governed by those sort of federal policies. But then when it comes to stuff like opportunity zones, what is the edge of an opportunity zone in Guam? What's our competitive advantage versus an opportunity zone in Louisiana? Well, in Louisiana, an opportunity zone is probably in a blighted area, not near the ocean, et cetera, et cetera. Here in Guam, our opportunity zone overlooks the ocean. And by the way, it's 2 miles away from a military base, which is the most strategic holding in, America
Right.
at the current time,
Mhm.
right? And so I think that that's kind of not necessarily serving as a hub, but it helps you diversify your investments. So you're not just investing in sort of Merca, right?
Right.
You have kind of an international investment
Mm-hmm.
without all the risks of being in a foreign country, right? So it's not investing in the Philippines or China or
You're investing in Guam, but you're still being able to retain
yeah,
your investment without losing on being taxed.
right.
Mm.
So you get the features, advantages, and benefits of being sort of in Asia,
Yeah.
but you have the you have the advantages of being in America and an American company more or less, but you also have the advantages of being this close to Asia proximity wise.
Yeah. Is there a reason why we should be attractive to Asia? And is there like a plan to be as such?
You mean like for Asian investors to come into Guam?
In any respect, I guess, whether it be tourism, getting more tourists here from different parts of Asia, or it could be investors
Yeah.
investing long term into the area without us at a disadvantage of losing, like what's happening like in Zimbabwe, right, where they get foreign investors to invest into utility systems. The government can't pay it back. So now China owns their utilities, which in turn they own
Right.
the country, right?
You mean
Right.
like the power authority?
You mean
That's
like
so happening?
if the Chinese were to come in and buy GPA?
that what you
right.
mean?
No. I mean anything, I guess.
Sure.
Right.
I mean,
I was just trying to go as open ended as possible.
So for better or worse, we still have a ton of federal policy to deal with, right? So
Right.
one of the things we'd like to do is we'd like to very much explore is aquaculture, so growing like shrimp and stuff like that, and more than
Over
more,
at
aquaculture more than just tilapia.
right.
And one of the best ways to do any kind of aquaculture venture is to straight up do it in the ocean,
Yeah.
and offshore, have your nice little operation, grow yourself some parrotfish or whatever.
Put the guy on the outhouse on the floating house out there.
Exactly. And
Stick.
Have him float away on accident.
but the difference between us and neighboring Palau or
Mhm.
neighboring FSM or is that we have the US EPA to contend with,
Right.
And so sometimes it's like, I don't know, maybe sure, we're right next to Asia, so we could be a good target as far as like, oh, right next door, American soil.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's sort of like, but you still got the American barriers and the American bureaucracy to deal with to some extent that, for better or worse, affects kind of the carpetbaggers, right?
For sure.
Coming to Guam. And I think that, but as far as being attractive to Asia, I think they're very interested in anything dealing in tourism, putting up hotels and real estate, so homes, hotels, etc.
Yeah, that's gold.
Yeah, and so that seems to be of interest as of late. And
What?
trying to think of other sorts of things. One of the things I think that GVB is trying to do is they're trying to capture a higher margin visitor, so a visitor that spends more, instead of sort of the budget travelers. So for a long time, Guam's been a kind of a family destination, and so to attract a more sophisticated traveler that has more discerning taste buds, wants to eat at a finer dining restaurant, wants to eat at
Shop at Gucci.
exactly,
Right.
So I know that that's a pursuit that they've had as well. There's a small cruise ship task force that exists. Small cruise ships are like 500 passengers and below. Same thing. It's sort of a niche traveler market. You're not looking at a boat that carries thousands of people. It's a smaller, sort of like the expeditionary type boats that you see in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be cool right around this area. It provides a unique experience.
Right.
So yeah. So we're looking at all those.
How about like working with the CNMI Is there any reason? I mean, Tinian used to raise cows, right?
Yeah.
And utilizing Tinian beef and being able to take advantage of stuff like that, bananas in Pompeii or
Yeah, I'd love to see all that. I think the biggest barrier at the current time is really just the freight, the cost of transporting among islands. Because at one point in time, you used to have a ship that went both ways, right?
Mhm.
Now it just goes one way. So you have a ship that will come to Guam and drop off, pick up whatever, and then go to the islands, but you don't have that same ship coming back. So
Right.
Guam could very well grow lettuce and export it to Saipan instead of Saipan getting their lettuce from Korea.
Right.
But then Saipan or Pohnpei with or then with the sweet potatoes or the Pohnpei with the bananas couldn't very well send it back to Guam unless it was on an airplane.
Right.
So I think that's a barrier, but it's
Right.
not
And like you said, the Jones Act, like it's a
Mhm.
killer handcuff as far as trade. Right.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something, I mean, I kind of hope, so Puerto Rico's kind of imploded, as a territory. I don't know if you guys saw them in the
Oh
news,
yeah.
but they're doing all kinds of, and then the icing on the cake was when the president was, tweeting all, not
Her
tweeting,
caught
WhatsApping
the text.
his
Yeah.
old voice chat. And it's basically like
Never text the boys, huh?
it's basically like a Puerto Rican FD chat.
Hey. I don't know if I should take that as a good thing or a bad thing. I'm going to text my boys now.
That's right, I said it. And so, that was like the icing on the cake, right?
For sure.
But one of the things is, the U.S. government has a real compelling reason to just like let Puerto Rico kind of like, why don't we
Dissolve.
try this? Why don't we try lifting the Jones Act for Puerto Rico? So then it becomes, well, if you're doing it for Puerto Rico, why don't you just add Guam?
Yeah.
And so
and
then,
Hawaii and everyone else.
or then it becomes a cautionary tale. Well, do you want Guam to end up like Puerto Rico? Maybe you should try to change that policy. So I don't know. It's just, it works both ways.
Well, and I think too, you have other individuals maybe starting to poke at that kind of the elephant in the room of let's just keep things as is, or we're always going to have these federal constraints, and that was the other outreach that I did with Senator Will Castro, because I knew that he had a kind of a Mariana's Group workforce that was looking at trying to figure out ways of, from a trade security standpoint, of what does this puzzle look like? What are our ways of working? And a lot of the other islands were interested in it, and so I feel like that approach is one aspect of the again, the multifaceted strategy.
For sure.
But it doesn't have to necessarily be product. I mean, again, it goes back to individuals. I mean,
Right.
we're already having this. We were talking about earlier the cross pollination of individuals coming from Guam to other areas, but then you have a lot of obviously import of a lot of different cultures coming here, and I feel like that is also a part of Guam's identity that they need to not necessarily see as a weakness, but that has also improved our culture.
Yeah, it's contributed to both the economic and the political landscape of where we sit on today. I mean, my girlfriend's father, he's Taiwanese, and he's contributed on the economic side as a business owner and stuff like that, and there's many people just like him from different backgrounds and different races that's able to contribute to this place.
And I think it's gotten better, because I remember, I born and raised in Chalampago, and my first cousins, the Tyrants, they lived right next to us, and I think, and I went through public school, there was always this strong Chamorro pride, and they would always, my dad was Irish white, and Chamorro also, but they were always, even though we knew their mom, Auntie Dolores, was the same Irish Chamorro, they would always tell us, we're 100% Chamorro. They would, they're the ones that went around.
All the way till I was 18. I was like, dude, I'm 100%, bro. I don't know what you're talking about.
But that was intimidating. They're the ones that went into church with no slippers. They're the ones.
I think Matt still does that, right, Matt? He don't go to church.
But that's
Not in slippers.
Yeah.
But that's that's part of our culture. But I feel there's been this a willingness to adapt, to accept that there is diversity in the culture as well as lifestyle, and that has allowed families to be more open, families to be more engaging, to be acceptable to what their kids need, to what the grandparents need.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that is also somewhat of a challenging, I would say, priority, I would assume, from a social service standpoint, because now you have a growing population. A lot of them are not necessarily, as part of the culture that was probably surveyed 5, 10 years ago. And so you all of a sudden have a very diverse needs. And so that's the belly of the beast, is what I've learned from working with government agencies and policy making, is no matter how big or how small, there is always the same issues to deal with, and so you won't really know about it until you get into the belly of the beast. And that's where individuals like Mel and a lot of elected officials, they're like, I don't want any other job, because what I have now is way over than what you can think of me needing to be able to address. So
Right, and then the hat can even unknowingly come with like 3 hats in itself, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Whew. Wow, we dove deep into that. I like it. I like it. It's because it's an important time to be able to recognize, the changes that's going through this place, and it's happening faster than it's ever happened in all the history of Guam.
Yeah.
I agree.
And I think we need to, as much as we respect the past, this is as much respect that we need to give to this time now, because
And to the future.
right, and because we are not only reacting to it, we're also trying to be proactive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're the opportunities that we're having now is almost the same thing that our ancestors were doing. They were trying to tell stories of what they learned to their grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
And then our grandchildren or our grandparents were trying to tell us what they learned. They went through war. I mean, we've all got those stories, and now we have the platforms to be able to share it to folks who are not necessarily just a street down the road. They're all 18 hours away on a flight, listening while they're going to their work at MSN in Seattle. I mean, that's just crazy. But we're doing the exact same thing as if we're all back here. We're at the best school, like FD, drinking beer. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I meant.
Did I come out?
I didn't mean about best school. No. But
I didn't mean drinking beer.
I mean, that's right. Yeah. That's right. The age difference changed. But I mean, that's where I'm trying to teach, or I'm trying to tell my kids that, and they have no, and they unfortunately they haven't had the opportunity to come out here. But I feel like that's very unique that we were able to get from our parents, grandparents, is that they love to tell the stories, and we were respectful to it, and we need to try to continue that.
Yeah,
and that will actually gain value in everything that we focus on.
Well, you're part of a whole generation too that's sharing those stories with your kids, and them being able. I've talked to a couple people out who are born and raised in the States, never been to Guam ever,
Mm-hmm.
and all they say is like, man, we're yearning to come home, but we don't know how to do it. We don't know if we'll be accepted.
Sure.
Will my understanding of the culture be accepted to everyone else that's here on Guam? It's like, no, dude, that's not the way we do things. That's not Guam culture. It's like, but that's the way my grandfather taught me. And he moved to the States in the 70s. And so I know 70s Guam culture. It's not accepted. It's not considered Chamorro or Guam. And maybe it might become something that will continually be a battle between, a generation that's grown up in the States who have ties to Guam and the generations that continue to grow here, right? But that doesn't mean that there has to be a disconnect. We can, like you said, we can still be connected and know what's happening on Guam through digital media, through what people are putting on the internet,
Right.
whether it's good news or bad news.
Right. Yeah. But that puts a lot of pressure.
It does.
I mean, that puts a lot of pressure on you guys, it puts on the media.
Yeah.
Even individuals now, unfortunately, you don't rely on that. You don't
But
have to rely on Guam posts. You have to, everyone that has Instagram, Facebook, they're all putting their narrative
Yeah.
on what's actually happening.
I
Agreed.
think it calls for a lot of different points of view, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's nothing wrong with a couple different interpretations. I remember when the PDN was really the only paper.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Post came out, and it's sort of like, oh, they have an interesting spin on things. And then it became, I don't know which one I like better than the Post, And so I don't know. I think it calls for a lot of different points of view.
Well, now there isn't just two
bureaucratic.
Yeah,
talking.
there isn't just one narrative. There isn't just two narratives.
Mm-hmm.
There's 160,000 narratives
Yeah.
Yeah.
plus.
Right.
And what do we do with it? How do we continue to progress forward without becoming Puerto Rico?
Right. Stay away from the chat. Say nothing. Admit
Say
nothing.
nothing.
Admit nothing on WhatsApp.
Just do WhatsApp. Yeah.
Right. They thought it was third party encrypted.
But yeah, a lot of factors have happened. I'm visiting. This is my second time in the last 17 years, and it's always
How long before that? Before this time?
It was 2016.
Okay.
So so it was 17 years,
Uh,
and it was because of family funerals.
mhm.
And what's interesting is, as much as the climate has changed, the environment, we're still dealing with the same issues. I have family coming from Palau, and they're dealing with the same issues with, their culture is aging, and they're having the younger generation deal with not just what has always been a part of their culture or part of what was supposed to be the way that you're supposed to do stuff. You have a matriarch society. You have to follow the certain ways of respecting individuals, etc.
Mhm.
But the generation is pushing buttons. They're wanting to know, why is it the way that we do that? And then I think that's also influencing those who are also growing old to a degree. That might sound negative to those who are growing old, but they're also wanting to say, hey, why do I always have to do it this way?
Right.
Just because I know that doesn't mean I have to do it. And so I feel like it's also influencing not just from a younger generation, it's actually all generations. It's just more of being willing to accept that someone's asking questions, we're listening, and then seeing what actually happens. And if we're giving the respect for that to happen, then we get moments where, you have the 1,000 folks, or and I might be misquoting it, but when they were walking down for independency down to Adaloop, that's, moments like that where we're able to, yes, it's kind of monumental to be able to share it through social media or digitally, but there's a lot of opportunities that happened in the past that were kind of iconic in that way.
For sure.
But iconic moments don't necessarily mean iconic action, and I think that's where we need to see that
Interesting.
actions happen. And I feel like when we get to see those happen, and that's where we really need to identify them.
Right. And I think the pride needs to come from not just one facet. It has to come as a whole. And the pride, for some odd reason, only comes when you leave Guam. It's like, I left Guam. I'm from Guam, baby. Guam flag, all the Guam gear,
Right.
Sanahi. Then you come home like, shit, that's Chad, dude. I don't know if I'm gonna wear that shit.
Yeah.
I'm good, dude. I'm already here. Why do I have to represent Guam? Right? And maybe also that can be a factor too of if people have more pride in the place, people will be more willing to want to change for the better and be involved and actually become that stakeholder or that policymaker or that director, and we won't experience that brain drain of losing our talent and exporting our talent unwillingly, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's a good rap.
How long have we been going here?
Look at this smart guy.
No.
That's
It's
awesome.
Just weaving everything we said.
Not at all. How long have we been going here, man?
54?
Hour 54.
Hitting 2 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm about 9 minutes off this time, right? Yeah. I usually hit the ask question around an hour 45, and I really love these talks, and I don't think I've had this kind of discussion in a while, as far as like economic progress and how we as a society can grow and continue to grow, because it's an important conversation, and it's maybe we're not the only ones having this conversation. Maybe we might be recording it, but I'm sure there are many people, whether it's at the barbecue or whether it's at the bar, wherever it may be, these kind of conversations about progression and how we're going to constantly improve this place and make this place better, and quit having this place become a thought in people's mind where there's no opportunity there, dude.
Right.
I'm gonna go because there's no opportunity. And I tell people this on the podcast all the time. It's like Guam, how I look at it, and from all the people that I've talked to, both on the podcast and just around the island, it's a place of created opportunity,
Mhm.
and you have to be willing to fight tooth and nail to battle through the suck and the hard times, and be willing to take a chance on ourselves. And it's happening. We're taking chances on ourselves, and we just have to not give up so easily when it.
Yes, exactly. Stick
Well,
to it.
right.
The grit.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta have that grit.
Well, and be true to yourself. And if yourself was, raised by your family that was grown here
Mm-hmm.
to a degree, then just be that, because there's no one else that has had the opportunity to been raised in Guam as the way that you have been. I mean, you mentioned that earlier. There's a lot of folks who wish they had the opportunity to know how it was to live in Guam. Well, you have it, so don't be, nervous about it. Don't be ashamed about it. I mean, when I was saying earlier where we had to say we were South Pacific Polynesian, I mean,
Right.
that was.
You missed that. You want to?
Yeah, well, I was just saying
expand?
that from when our family moved to Oregon, we took a restaurant. We were a South Pacific, Eastern European menu-based restaurant, and we were telling people that we were, Guam was kind of like a Polynesian flair. And he caught it. He was like, "Well, we're not Polynesian, we're Micronesian." And I was like, "Well, yeah, it's because the education."
They don't know the difference.
Right. So,
Right.
but that's I
To
that
them,
felt
we're all Moana, right?
right,
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
right. So at that moment, I felt I was not strong in my culture to be able to try to take that step to be proud of my culture, and I feel like as time goes on, the realization that I took advantage of that, I think what our parents try to teach us is, what we're giving you is valuable, and it's for you to take and be able to make sure that is either passed along or you do something with it, because
Yeah,
it's pretty unique. You don't know
It's
a lot
not
of
always.
people
Yeah, it's not
that's gone
only.
through a Japanese war where they were hiding in caves. We're at that pivotal moment where no one's gonna have those.
Yeah, my grandmother was a
stories.
child slave in the rice fields. Like crazy.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily passing down land or money.
Right.
It's knowledge.
Right.
It can be traditional, it can be contemporary, but it's how we. Oh man, I really wanted to. I wish we can expand on the whole education thing. You brought up something great of businesses in inserting themselves into the educational system, and we have a very, very old U.S. traditional educational system where the U.S. educational system was developed to have people work in the factories, right? Follow the rules, work in the assembly lines, and help America grow, right? But we're based off of an educational system where when kids graduate now, it's like, so what do I do with this? Where do I go? No one taught me how to pay taxes. No one taught me how to get a
Right.
job.
Right.
No one taught me how to fend for myself. I know a shitload about the social studies and geometry. What do I do with this? And so the next best bet is military or continued education to where you can find it, right?
Well, I think programs and life skills. I think I know that nonprofits. I mean, I'm assuming that that's where the partnerships with government agencies are trying to implement those programs. But maybe this is I don't want to go down that path of where we're always complaining. Let's be solution based. And maybe, and I know that Mel mentioned in our conversation yesterday or earlier in the week where, they're trying to do more community outreach. Maybe there's an opportunity where, from a podcast standpoint, that you can have kind of this roundtable discussion with leaders and really put them on the hot seat and be able
I don't want to be that guy. Don't make me that guy.
You are that guy.
No, man.
But maybe there's an opportunity.
Hey, you know that guy, Buada? Don't bring that guy.
Right.
Don't invite that guy again, please.
But I think there needs to be
revoke his press pass.
Right. Don't give Master Random a press pass.
They just need a lively conversation, I think.
Right.
I think if folks who just stimulate the outside of that realm of just, okay, here's the canned questions that we have for you. Here's your talking points. But more having just like, okay, we're going to chat on this topic, but then go down a rabbit hole to a degree. Maybe there's a series.
Yeah.
Maybe there is a series where, you have an opportunity to be networked with these folks, because I think that's where the stimulation of figuring out, oh yeah, that is a good idea. Maybe we should, have more conversations about it. And that's how things happen. So
For sure.
There are 2 podcasts I'd recommend for economic types of discussions, as well as some stuff about what financial policy means to me. Like, what do lower interest rates mean to me, and why does it matter? One of them is Planet Money.
Okay,
The other
I've heard
one
of it.
is the other one is called Pitchfork Economics, and Pitchfork Economics is a pretty interesting one. It talks about a lot about wealth inequality. So like rich getting richer, poor getting poorer,
Right.
that kind of thing, which I think is really pretty significant right here in Guam. So
For sure.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Those are good ones. I'm going to add those to my library
do it, man.
of many podcasts.
Do it.
yeah, there are a lot.
There's a shitload. I feel like podcast has become like, if you want to learn something, you kind of just think of your favorite thing and you can find somebody talking about it.
Right. You kind of go down a rabbit hole, though. Like sometimes when I'm talking to Ray, I'll be like, "So, babe, I was talking to so and so the other day," and he's like, "You were talking to?" I was listening to the podcast.
Wait, was this when he was watching Downtown Abbey?
Yeah, no, he wasn't watching Downton Abbey. I was watching Downton Abbey.
That's not what he said at the forum. That's good.
You don't want to watch.
Just kidding.
You
Just
don't want to
kidding.
watch Downtown Abbey.
Downtown Abbey.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I feel like this was healthy discussion. And like I said, it could be happening everywhere else. And I hope that people who are listening to this kind of like take it and branch off into their own discussions, whether you're here or you're stateside. Like I said, now we live in a time where even though you're stateside, you can still have that contribution to this place, right? And
Most definitely.
it may be a little harder. You might not be here physically, but it's very, very possible.
Right.
So
Yeah, and that's part of what motivated me to reach out to you is like the last time I came out to the islands, I was distracted just because of a family funeral. And then this time around, my last living grandmother passed away, and she was a very strong woman. She was from Palau. She moved here, really in the 70s. And, she was adamant about trying to make sure that we had antidotes of really living the way that you wanted to. She actually wanted to go her own way. She passed away on her birthday, and I think that's why I was like, you know what, I need to talk to folks who are trying to do it their own way, and that's why I wanted to reach out to you.
thank you, man. I really
reach out
appreciate
to
that,
the
and I
community.
really appreciate bringing out Mel.
Yeah.
Anytime, man. I'm here.
Yeah. We should definitely do it again.
We could do our own version of Pitchfork Economics.
I'm curious.
We could call it what is that? What is that called? The
Tonks.
like a sickle in tomorrow,
He's not talking to you, man.
Tell me, babe.
Machete economics. Live by the machete economics.
Kamzu economics.
Kamzu economics.
No, I really like this. I really like these kinds of discussions, and like I said, it's been a while since it comes up in conversation, but to go deep into it with people who have experience in whether it be policymaking or even working in the government and being you're literally at the forefront of economic development here on Guam, right? And so, thank you for reaching out, EJ, and thank you for bringing Mel. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. This is wonderful.
Yeah. Anything you want to put out there before we cut out?
Try Redbreast Irish whiskey.
Yeah, that's what we've been drinking. That's why I've been talking for so long. Mel, anything GEDA got coming up that people can look forward to?
Yeah, we have a lot of stuff coming up. I mean, definitely if any of the things we discussed tonight are of interest to you, please, get in touch with us and communicate with us. And we're really trying to do a good job about trying to be out there in the community, trying to communicate to the public about what it is that we're doing, the projects we're working on. We're always looking. There's a lot of our board has set up a lot of different committees dealing as well as the governor's put out some task forces like the aquaculture, agriculture, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So if any of these are of interest to you, then please give us a holler.
Cool. Hell yeah. Thank you.
Investguam.com.
Investguam.com. That's a real website?
Yes.
Okay. Investguam.com.
Investguam.com. That's our website.
Great.
EJ.
Hey.
Thank you, man.
Everybody.
Man, if you didn't reach out to me, and I wouldn't have the pleasure of sitting here having this great conversation, man. So
thanks.
Thank you. And next time you come out, let's definitely do it again.
Sure.
Yeah. And Mel.
Hey.
Thank you.
Nice
I know the table's long. It's it's an extended table, so we're not touching feet on the bottom. So
I thought that was your foot the whole time, dude.
Might have been Kona.
It's all nice and warm.
Yeah. So, but anytime you want to come back on the podcast, if you have anyone you recommend me talking to, hit me up, and definitely let me know. We can continue this conversation. I feel like we didn't even touch on the marijuana stuff.
That's right.
But we'll save it for another conversation.
We will.
And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the podcast. I'm sure this is the first time the camera's been on me because I've been giving you guys the limelight. I really wanted that. Thank you for listening to another episode of the podcast. EJ McManus and Mel Mendiola. I hope you enjoyed this conversation because I did, and I just hope for a better Guam, and just everybody constantly thinking of how to progress this place. Like I said, near or far, you have a stake in this place, and there's only one of it. We make up 0.00006 of landmass here on this earth, and probably even lesser of a population, or maybe that might be backwards, but it should matter to you. And it should, if you're here, this place really should matter. Pick up your trash. And until next time, peace out. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. Quick shout out to our sponsors, Budweiser. Enjoy responsibly and drink wiser. To Pay Less One, your one-stop shop for organic and natural products and education. Go and support us on all social media platforms. Don't forget to tell your friends about the podcast. Listen to the podcast, your way to connect to the island of Guam. Peace out, everybody.